Hello to everyone and welcome to our webinar today. This is one of Wild Apricot's monthly expert webinars, and today we're honored to have Jasmine Morrow, who is the Director of Nonprofit Strategy at GuideStar, on with us today. And GuideStar is the world's largest source of information on nonprofit organizations. So we're really pleased to have Jasmine with us. And Jasmine is an expert on how nonprofits can grow by creating the right online presence. And today, she's going to show us how you can attract and connect with donors online. And we'll bring Jasmine on shortly. In the meantime, let me introduce myself. That is me right there on the left of your screen, Donald Cowper, and I'm on the Wild Apricot content team, and beside me, sitting on my right, on the right of your screen, is Jason Wiseman, and he'll be on chat to help with any technical issues you might have. So during the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions to us, and as well to Jasmine, our presenter, and to do that, you can use the chat box. And I want to make a couple of quick reminders before moving on. And the first is that I want to let you know that we are recording this session, and we'll be sending you an email with a link to the recording within the next couple of days. So please watch out for that. And secondly, I want to let you know that by attending today, you are eligible to earn 1 CAE credit. And we'll get going in just another couple of minutes, but let me briefly say that today's webinar is being brought to you by Wild Apricot. I know that we have many of our customers on with us today, so I want to send a big welcome to all of you. It's great to have you back. But I also know that we have many people here who aren't familiar with Wild Apricot, and I want to welcome you as well. And for those of you who don't know, very briefly, Wild Apricot is membership management software. It's actually an all-in-one solution for anyone running a membership organization. That's because you can manage your member and contact database, you can run your events, build your website, process all your payments, and much more. And many of our customers consider it a lifeline because it saves them hours each day in administrative tasks, freeing them up to focus on fulfilling their organization's mission and doing things like connecting with and attracting donors, which is what Jasmine's going to talk about today. And we're really quite thrilled with what many of our clients have been able to accomplish. We've watched many of them grow since we started 10 years ago, and they've watched us grow too. And thanks to our customers, we've been ranked as the #1 rated membership management software solution on the market. In fact, for the last 5 years. And while we're really proud of ourselves here at Wild Apricot for helping people with great software, we're also a leading provider of free educational content, which you'll find on our blog and in webinars like we have today. If any of you do have questions about Wild Apricot, we're happy to answer them at the end of the webinar, so you're all free to stick around with us after the hour if you happen to have the time. So now, let me introduce today's presenter. Jasmine Morrow is the Director of Nonprofit Strategy at GuideStar, and as I mentioned just a few moments ago, GuideStar is the world's largest source of information on nonprofit organizations. And Jasmine has an extensive background in nonprofits. Before joining GuideStar, she spent time as the communications and operations coordinator at Great Oakland Public Schools, which is an education advocacy nonprofit. She's also been involved with the San Francisco Parks Trust, an urban greening nonprofit where she recruited volunteers, developed membership strategies, and connected with community members to build community gardens. And she is also a board member at the California Food Policy Advocates. So she knows firsthand the challenges nonprofits face, and one of those challenges being attracting, connecting with donors, and how you can solve those challenges in the online world. And now I'm going to pass over the presentation to Jasmine. So Jasmine, a big welcome to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, Donald, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and just chat more with you all about optimizing your online presence. I think a lot about the ways that donors can connect with nonprofits, and nonprofits can better share their story. And so I'm really excited to just give you all some tips and tricks and experience to help you out. So today what we'll talk about are the ways that donors want to engage with nonprofits, both online and in their donating processes in general, and then also ways that organizations have mapped their work onto optimizing for this. And also I want to identify a couple of resources that you can use as you're going through this process yourself. So first, I just want to give you a bit of an overview of GuideStar itself and what makes us positioned to give you some advice around this. So at GuideStar, we think a lot about the data and information sector overall and the ways that pieces of information become knowledge for folks. So the main pieces that I'll talk about here are the information that comes from nonprofits, and it flows through many different institutions, so foundations, places of learning, all of these different things. And then GuideStar really works as a data hub. So we collect and connect information so that it becomes more tangible and kind of fill in some of those gaps. A lot of that comes from nonprofits themselves and then also from other institutions. And then from there, we share that out. So through our website, guidestar.org, but also through our many partners and their channels. So we think a lot about the ways that other channels, not just the folks who come and visit GuideStar, but workplace giving platforms or individual donor platforms, the ways that they would like to collect and process information. So what I'll share today is some academic research and then also some of the requests that we get from our partners who use our information to power their donation websites themselves. So I hope that that is helpful. Excuse me. So I feel like we all wish that we could have this kind of view into a donor's head, right? Just what are the things that you want to hear? Is it from our beneficiaries? Is it, social proof? What are the things that you want to know to help your donation process? Now, I can't give you this kind of bird's eye view, but I will share some of the research that we've come across and some of our experience to help you along the way. So what I want to talk about is, I'm going to call these the 5 secrets to engaging donors. And I didn't necessarily put online in here because I think that a lot of these translate back and forth really cleanly throughout the process, but I will have a special emphasis on online. So there's 5 in total, and we'll go through all of them. Show me the money, be transparent, meet people where they are, literally, be accessible, and then follow up. But let's start with the show me the money. So when we're thinking about money, I want to first draw your attention to a fact that donations aren't increasing proportional to the way that wealth is increasing in our country. And so there is a body of research called Money for Good that was published in 2015, and I believe Jason's going to share a link for that through the Chamber Collective. But one of those pieces is just looking at why that might be and asking donors directly. So there's a couple of reasons, starting from the left. Folks feel pretty good about the amount they're giving right now, so they're not really wanting to shift that. The second, and I think that there's ways to provide insight into this for folks, is that people have a really limited insight into how their giving measures up. So what that means is that they assume that they are giving more or comparable to their peers. And so when people understand what their peers are giving, they feel more compelled to give more. And the couple that I want to focus on today are lack of trust in nonprofits and their beneficiaries and feeling overwhelmed and ill-equipped to make good decisions. And these are things that on your website and in your online presence, you can directly combat and directly help to support organizations in feeling more trustful and feeling more equipped in the ways that they want to sort through information. So I want to first share with you just some of the top donor concerns. So when the Chamber Collective did this research, they just directly asked donors, what are you worried about? And so I want to pull out a couple of these. How is the organization using my money? I'm not sure what this nonprofit does or what the beneficiaries are like. And I don't know enough. And so those are all things that you can so directly combat by just sharing more information and more clear and concise information on your website. And we can talk a bit more about that. But so I call this section Show Me the Money because in general, folks want to know where their money is going and how it is being used. So if you want to take this analogy to a restaurant, when you yourself are choosing a restaurant, there's a ton of different dimensions that you might think about. So you might want to think about the ambiance or the taste or how your friends are looking at it or how a top chef might look at it. All of those ways are important, but what I want to stress is that there's a lot of nuance there. Okay, so you could think about user reviews or ambiance or expert reviews or nutritional quality if that's important to you. Not excuse me, restaurant sustainability, or perhaps their health rating. And so there's a ton of different resources out there for you. Yelp and Zagat and Facebook. All of those are lots of different ways you're still arriving at what restaurant should I eat at tonight, but there's a ton of different perspectives that you want to take into account. And so I want to keep that analogy throughout our presentation, our talk today, is just to think about the ways that can bubble up for folks when they're thinking about nonprofit. So when individuals are doing research, these are some of the questions that they're seeking advice on. So they want to know, how much good is the organization accomplishing? They want to know your track record. They want to know specifically what their money is being used for. So a lot of this is around just giving individuals a really clear idea of how their money is being used and what good that's going toward. So when they're doing this research, where are they looking? Thankfully, the very first place they are looking is your website. And so you want to make sure that that's a really clear and welcoming space for them, that they can find information really easily. So if I want to go back to this restaurant analogy, the thing that I hate is when I go to a restaurant's website and I want to know the menu and I want to know what time you close, and I see 50 million other things. So whatever it is that is the most important information that you can give to your beneficiaries or your stakeholders of any kind, that's what you want to be up front and center. The other places that folks go to look are just a general internet search. So, Googling, what is this organization's impact, things like that, and aggregate websites. So that's things like guidestar.org or a local cause-based website, something like that. So these are places where there's a collection of different nonprofits. And then, of course, looking to beneficiaries, there's things like Great Nonprofits, or there's others that I'll share more with you later. And then, of course, asking family and friends. And so these are in order of how often folks look at these. So your website is front and center, but it is not the only thing. And so make sure that you're really thinking about the ways that permeates online, what that looks like. So if we were to take this analogy back to the restaurants and think about what that looks like for the nonprofit social sector, there are some pretty clear analogies. So for stakeholder reviews, for those things that are sort of like Yelp, there's Great Nonprofits, and that's where individuals who are both beneficiaries or employees or also board members come and leave reviews for an organization. There's looking at experts and influencers. One of the ways that that's done is through Philanthropedia, which is an expert-sourced giving guide. There's standards of quality. So that's things like the Better Business Bureau Wise Giving Alliance. And more deep analysis, some simplified star ratings, some impact comparison, and then of course your peers again. And so all of these things are really important. And what I want to stress here is that none of them stand alone. That folks go back and forth to a ton of these and use them in different combinations and at different times. And so you just want to be aware of these as resources that other folks are looking to. Some of them you have control over and some of them you don't, right? So for example, your star rating, you don't necessarily have control over that. Your deep performance analysis done by Root Cause GiveWell, sometimes you have some control over, whether or not they review you, sometimes you don't. But it's important to check out your presence in all of these and just understand where you sit. So overall, I can't give you a deep look into anyone's head, but if you were to look at those main concerns and those main research questions, it boils down into 3 buckets: your performance, how's my money being used, and your organization's legitimacy. Do you have a track record? What are you doing? Are you in the clear with the IRS? Those kinds of questions. So I forgot to mention that I'm going to pause throughout for questions, just at the end of each of these quick sections. So if anyone has any questions now, let's go ahead and open up the floor for questions.
Okay, Jasmine, it's Donald here. So we do have one question here. How do you get donors to stop paying attention to overhead ratios and want the other information you offer?
That's a great question. So I think we'll actually cover a lot of that in the next section when we talk about the overhead myth in general. Um, let me. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in when we start to talk about transparency. But I think overall, it's giving them something else to look at and to think about. So I think really the reason that folks ask for overhead is because they want to be responsible donors and they want to look at something and make some comparisons. So giving them information that still helps them to make responsible comparisons is what you really want there. That's a great question. So let's talk next about being transparent. So that, oh, animation. So the first way that I want to talk about this is about the overhead ratios. So if you're not familiar, the idea of overhead ratios is that as a proxy for effectiveness, some foundations and donors use the ratio between the amount that you spend on administration and fundraising compared to the amount that you spend directly on programs. And that's dangerous for a ton of reasons. One, it encourages organizations to not invest in their own work, not invest in their own infrastructure, in their staff, in training, planning, evaluation, those kinds of things. At GuideStar, it's something we feel really strongly about. We partnered with Independent Sector and BBB Wise Giving Alliance and Charity Navigator to really push back on this overhead myth. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a healthy overhead. There's nothing wrong with looking closely at the amount that an organization spends in their various buckets of work. What's dangerous is using that as a proxy for effectiveness. You can't tell what an organization is doing just by the amount that they use on administrative work. For example, if it's a research organization or a policy organization, that might be the vast majority of their work, and that doesn't mean that they're doing their work poorly. It means that they're doing their work differently than, say, a direct service organization might. And also, it's always a great idea to invest in your internal systems. So making that really clear. And so a big part of this for transparency is getting that information in front of folks. You don't have to tell them how much you spend. Well, you can absolutely, if someone asks, tell them how much you spend on your overhead, especially if they are a funder and they want to know. But give them other information too. Be transparent in all of your work. So that means, I'll get back to that in a second. That means sharing your programs and your lessons learned there. That means when you have a tough year financially, being okay with the fact that overall your story will tell itself. Just and really celebrating your learning. And then of course the fact that overhead isn't a dirty word, that you want to share the places that you invested in your organization and why that was important to you. Especially for individual donors, because there's this fear that their money might not be being used in the ways that they want it to, really explaining that the ways that they want it to are the ways that work. So an analogy that I heard that I really loved was that not wanting to invest in overhead is akin to seeing a firefighter putting out a fire. They're dousing a burning building with water and saying, I only want to pay for the water, not the hose, not the firefighter, not the uniform, not the truck, just the water coming out. And how little sense that makes to not support the whole system. So just really signaling all of the ways that you use your money wisely and all of the investments that you make in your work, and really sharing your overall costs. And so I want to share just a couple of resources that you might use for that. Nonprofit Finance Fund is really great for just better understanding your finances as a whole, but also better telling your financial story. So you'll just get really great language for pointing to those overhead pieces, or telling the story of your financial trajectory as a whole and not focusing on one year, those sorts of things. Forefront is really great at something called true cost, and they have some really interesting tools around how you might do that. Charting Impact is a set of 5 questions that are developed by ourselves, GuideStar, the independent sector, and BBB-Wise Giving Alliance. And there are 5 questions that really set the stage for how you, as an organization, have a vision for the future and how you plan on getting there. And then, of course, BBB-Wise Giving Alliance has a really great set of standards that you can go through and answer those questions. I believe that you have to pay to be certified, but you can also just use those questions as a jumping off space for how you might want to frame some language on your own websites. And lastly, I want to talk about, I couldn't come here without being really excited about the GuideStar Seals of Transparency. I work at GuideStar, and I specifically work on these seals of transparency. So it's pretty fitting here. What these do is, just as we've been talking about, they're just another form of being able to signal your organization's transparency. So here it's really about it's tiered: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. The higher your seal level, the more information you've shared on guidestar.org with your stakeholders. So things like if you start at basic, it's really kind of basic contact information, things about your programs. Silver is more about your finances, so that you can start to build trust in that area. Gold is those charting impact questions. So that's a really great way to get to those. And then platinum is really showing your results, which I think is incredibly important. So one great way to combat the overhead myth overall is to give somebody another number to look at. So the reason that overhead has been so successful is because it's simplistic, and folks can look at it and say, like, I see this one number that pretends to say, I see this number of things that you've accomplished. But what if you could show them the number of things that you've accomplished? And so that's what this does in a much more compelling way. So before I move on to the next section, the meet them where they are, I'd love to open it up for questions.
Okay, and we have some questions, Jasmine. So first is, what about if you have several projects and you want a specific project funding to go more than others?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that that's a just fine thing to highlight, that you have several projects, but you're really excited about this one, and talking about why that might be, and why that particular thing is in need of funding right then. On GuideStar, one way that you might do that is there's a section called funding needs, and you might really highlight that particular thing. Other ways that you might do that are crowdsourcing campaigns, especially if it's something that has a really finite goal. I think that just being able to fundraise with a crowd is so much easier when you say, we want this project to do this thing by this date. Um, those are some ways you might go about that.
Okay, and now we'll just take another one now. So, how do you handle a situation where a donor gives you funds, but specifically says no overhead or admin costs, and yet you must administer, audit, and report the use of funds?
I Well, so I think that that donor is confused about what overhead is. Um, and I think that you give that donor what they want, and you say, I did this this evaluation and this other thing, and you just don't call it overhead. Um, I think as long as you're really clear about what you've done, I don't think that that's being dishonest to your donor. Um, I If you're talking about like an institutional funder, I think that's how you would go about that. If you're talking about individual donors, I think I think in general, it's a great time to educate. I think that folks don't understand what overhead means, and so they get really nervous that it means that somehow you're having like luxury dinner somewhere. So explaining that overhead is evaluation, overhead is investing in your organization, I think can be really powerful. I also think that maybe leaving the word overhead out, and just talking about the great work that you're doing in investing in your own organization is really powerful.
Okay, just one more quick one, maybe before you move on to the next section. But somebody's asking about the GuideStar seal, and then is that something that you guys do once a year, or how often?
So you can earn a GuideStar seal whenever you'd like. It's also free, just to throw that in there. But um, the way that that works is that you just go onto the GuideStar website and um, fill in your profile and flesh it out a bit more. And so you can earn them, um, you know, you can earn all of them right now. You can earn one today and one tomorrow. It's totally up to you. But it is something that you want to come back and renew annually, because you want to always make sure that the information that you're sharing is up to date and clear and accurate.
Actually, we'll give you one more before moving on to the next section. How's that? This is maybe a largest question, but let's see what you might have. So, what does one? Sorry, how does one get for-profit businesses to work more with small nonprofits? And I'll let you handle that.
Well, it's a great question. I also, this is great. I think that this will lead a bit into this next section. Um, I think you just have to approach them. I think that having a really strong track record, having um, information that you can point to about your organization online and offline are incredibly important. But I do think that corporate social responsibility is something that's um, just pushing more and more to the forefront. So connecting with for-profits is beneficial for for-profits just as much as it's beneficial for nonprofits. I think there's a big blurring of that with for-profits really wanting to support good work in the social sector. Um, so it's finding those opportunities, it's finding those places where you overlap and where your missions might be similar, and yeah, and you know, making those inroads. And I think that we'll hit a little bit on that in this next section as we talk about point of sale giving and some other ways that you might do that. So with that, I'll go ahead and move on to this next section. So this is meet them where they are, literally. So what I mean by this is a few things. And we'll talk about all of them. One, you want to really just understand the personalities of your donors. Two, you want to be where they are online and offline. Um, so let's talk a bit first about the personalities of your donors. So this is another piece of research that's done by that same Chamber Collective. I highly recommend you check it out. So I really love this breakout of the different types of individual donors that there are. And so just really a quick overview, the idea that there's these contented beneficiaries, they do a ton of work, they do a ton of research, and they like doing that. Then there's the busy idealist. So that person would really love to invest well, and they think a lot about the ways that they want their money to be used and the good that they want to do, but they're busy and worried about the ways that their money might be used. And there's the cautious striver. So this person is really worried about making good decision, and you know, just kind of tiptoeing. So they're not quite. So the difference between that person and the busy idealist is maybe that the busy idealist has a lot more ideas exactly about what they'd like to see in the world. Then there's unaware potential. So these are people who could give and just haven't quite tapped that part of themselves for one reason or another. And then on the other side of this, there's the unengaged critic. So they are like the exact opposite of the contented beneficiary. They don't want to give you any money, and they're mad about it. No kidding, but they are very much disengaged and very much not ready to invest in those ways. And so the advice is that you really spend a lot of your time in this, in this center section where you can better move people. So the idea is that the contented beneficiary, they're ready to do all of this research, and they don't really need a lot of convincing and work from you. And the unengaged critics have already sort of pulled themselves out of this lineup, and so it's these three in the middle, and you want to really focus your messaging on those guys. So you want to make it a little more personalized. You want to make it engaging, and really make it a positive experience for them in a lot of different ways. And really, I think the biggest thing I can share with you here, just over and over, decrease overwhelm. So people are, when they feel called to give and donate, they really have this expectation that they want their money to go the furthest and the best that it possibly can. If that's $15 or $1,500, they still want that. And so there's a bit of responsibility on their end that they feel really strongly that they want to make a great decision. And so helping them to understand the decision that they're making in whatever ways you can is going to go so far. The next thing I want to talk about is just the ways that you reach folks. So a lot of these are the traditional ways that we think about connecting with people. So letter campaigns, in-person canvassing, telephone, just straight up begging. All of those things are, I'm not going to tell you that they're going anywhere because they're not. What I want to do is also add online giving as a way to reach donors and online engagement in general. So one thing that I'll share here is that surprise, surprise, millennials really like to go online. And so there's a ton a ton more people, a whole generation of folks who spend more of their time researching nonprofits online. And so that's 57% of millennials doing their research online. But that shouldn't be just relegated to millennials because it's almost 50% of everyone else too. So just in general, more people spend more of their time online, and that's the ways that they research and the ways that they think about their giving. And then there's another good chunk of folks who intend on switching. Okay. Um, So, if we can talk just for a bit about the different kinds of ways that you might use social media. So, here is just a quick smattering of the different branches of social media or channels of social media that you can use. So, obviously, Facebook, YouTube, Google Plus. Vine, may it rest in peace, is gone. So, those 200 million users are somewhere else now. But I like this chart because it gives you a relative breakdown of the number of users. And remember that these aren't mutually exclusive, that you can use any or all of these tools, and you just want to just be conscious of your audience and the ways that you want to share your message. So remember that Pinterest and Instagram are both ways of sharing images, but they attract very different folks. They do very different things, right? So Instagram is this really like personalized look. Pinterest is, built like a bulletin board and is a lot more about like the internet at large and collecting things. So just you want to think about those trade-offs and the ways that you might reach your particular audience. And we can talk a bit more about that. But I want to share with you, I think Facebook is one of the largest ways that folks engage. And so supporting your supporters in supporting you is a really great tool. So when you have a champion, empowering them to do something like start a Facebook campaign is incredibly powerful. So they connect with their peers and spread the word. So this is a screenshot of a Facebook online campaign. And they are raising money specifically for the Union of Concerned Scientists. So this is an individual who's running this campaign, and that's really powerful. And it's tends to be the way that a lot of crowdsourcing campaigns go these days, and they're powerful because they come from your supporters and not directly from you, which is something to think about. I think both are really exciting, but there is something really great about having something come from your supporters. Another thing I wanted to share is how Facebook Live can be really powerful. So this is an example of excuse me if I forget the name, of an organization, the Children's Miracle Network, doing a live stream of one of their events. So think of this as the modern day telethon. And so not only were folks engaging and sharing likes and comments, but you can also see here that Nick Williams donated. And so that's a really great, powerful social signal, and you can see that a lot of people were engaged in a ton of different ways, but of course also in donating. And so this is, of course, a really huge campaign. That's a famous person there, Nick Cannon, but it doesn't have to be. You can do these kinds of things on a much smaller scale as well. So I also want to talk about point of sale giving. And so this ties really well into something that someone else was asking about, which is connecting with for-profits. So there's a lot of ways that this happens. On the left here, you see kind of the traditional way that, I don't know if you remember going into a grocery store and seeing just a ton of balloons everywhere, or hands, or those kinds of things where you would buy one of these for $1, or just put money in when you're at the register. So those are powerful ways that still work. At my local Whole Foods, every month they switch to another local charity. And so finding out those connections of your local organizations and for-profit connections can make a huge difference. There's also just electronic point of sale, right? So there's when you go on Amazon Smile or which I'll talk about in a bit, but when you go on Amazon.com and are able to make a click there, or when you're at your Rite Aid and it says, would you like to give to Autism Speaks? One example that I thought was really neat was that I took a flight the other day and I was on Virgin, and you could, use the fancy touch screen and say like, oh, I want to order a drink, or I forgot my headphones, let me buy those. And you could also say, I'd like to give back, let me do that. And so right there on the touchscreen was a selection of about 5 nonprofits. I think they probably rotate them, and you could choose right there. And I think that this is a really powerful example of the way that online giving and just really reaching people where they are is permeating the culture of online donation. So literally wherever a person physically is an opportunity for them to give. They have mobile phones. They have all those things that are at their fingertips. And even when you're in the air, there's still like a space for you to give. And so just really thinking about that and the ways that you can bring that to nonprofits or to donors. So also I want to just point out the fact that your information is probably a ton of places already, and so making sure that it's clean and clear and what you want it to be is incredibly important. So these are just a couple of GuideStars partners that I wanted to share with you. So these are workplace giving platforms. These are online crowdsourcing tools. These are places that people go to find organizations to give to. One that I think is really great is the Amazon Smile program. So the idea is that an individual can connect their Amazon account to any nonprofit of their choosing, and then just say, I'd like a portion of my purchases to always go to this nonprofit. And then, it's probably, just a really small amount every purchase, but those drops in the bucket make a huge difference. And then quarterly, that organization gets a check from just their many supporters. These are all a lot of different ways that your information could very well be online right now. The reason that I want to show this is, one, please go and update that information, but also make sure that you know where all your information is. And that can be as simple as doing a quick Google search. That can be as simple as coming to guidestar.org and checking on our list of partners and seeing if they have updated information on you. And all of those are really important. So before I get to this next section around accessibility, are there any other questions?
Okay. Well, we'll wait for some questions, but we did have one, a couple that came in about overhead, so I'll ask you those for now. And then, so here's one. We run a nonprofit animal rescue, and our latest annual report shows 97 cents of every dollar goes towards our program, and 3 cents of every dollar goes to our admin expenses. And then the question is, are admin expenses considered overhead?
Yeah, so admin expenses are considered overhead. Well, it depends. Some folks like to think about there's 2 different ways that you can define overhead. It can be either admin expenses, which, includes like your personnel, things like that. Or it can just be calculated around fundraising. And so both are problematic. I think fundraising is the more problematic one, because that's how we literally make our money. You know what I mean? Like, as nonprofits, you have to fundraise. So I think that it can be really problematic to limit an organization in that way. It sounds like you have a great overhead ratio. I would encourage you to still talk about all the ways that you invest in your own organization.
I guess this is a bit of a the accounting and overhead issue seems to be a particular interest. So here's one about splitting salary employee based on percentage of time working in different areas. So, for example, if I spend 25% of my time planning and physically running a program, could 25% of my salary be reflected in percentage our organization spends on programs?
So the short answer is yes. The other answer is it depends. So you can all absolutely you want to think about your salary as a part of the work that you do. So yes, in that way. Um, I also want to point out that I'm not our finance person, so I don't particularly I don't know the nitty gritty of that. Um, but I do know that people calculate it in a ton of different ways. I know that there are rarely wrong ways to think about the ways that you calculate your overhead. Um, and I think that that's another reason why it's really problematic. It's because folks know that donors hate overhead, so they just move it somewhere else instead of having the conversation that um, overhead isn't wrong. So those are the couple of things I'll leave you with. Is I'm sure that there are different ways to calculate it that are both more and less appealing, but also just sharing that story is still really great.
We do have, I see some other questions coming in, but I know you've got a couple other sections, so maybe we'll let you go on with that and then take as many questions as we can, short, just as we get closer to the top of the hour.
Sure thing. Okay. So this next section is around accessibility, and I mean that both in the way of connecting to people and then also making your website uh, accessible. So Uh, so I put this little cartoon in here because I think that often this is what people think of when they think of like using technology um, for connecting with people. Is you see this sad guy who no longer is getting his hand shaked, and this guy is only connecting with this robot. And so instead, I'd like you to think about it like this. Um, this is this rich landscape where people are using technology with one another, in support of one another, and really using it to better connect. I think that it can be really tempting to kind of efficiency your way out of connecting with your constituents and your stakeholders and folks like that. And so this is just my word of caution to have technology make you more accessible to your stakeholders and beneficiaries. So at GuideStar, we recently launched the GuideStar community. And a big part of that had to do with just wanting to better connect with the folks who use our website and have questions. And so we have people on staff who just respond to those questions and build rapport with folks and help to encourage conversation. So it's not about cutting off the conversation. It's really about kind of actively using technology to better kind of spur that. So like this is my caution against something like a chat bot, but absolutely an encouragement for something like a chat person, right? Who is there like answering questions, those kinds of things. The other thing that I'll say is that having a website that is optimized for mobile is incredibly important. So here's some statistics just around how important that is for users. So we hold in our hands in general a tiny computer and we use it as such. So not being able to access a website for an organization on your phone can really be make or break. So I do understand that if you have a wild apricot website, it is mobile optimized. So that's really great to hear. It is becoming more and more important. I can't tell you how many websites, not necessarily for nonprofits, but just in my life, that I've become really frustrated with and don't use because I can't use them on my phone. Um, so they're more likely to return if you do have a mobile optimized website, um, and far more likely to leave if you don't. Um, and of course, so when we talk about more likely to buy, this is a really a general statistic, but that translates directly into being more likely to donate to your organization. So like having that connection really clear is always going to be important. So the last thing I want to talk about for this section is accessibility. So you would not build a physical destination that someone in a wheelchair couldn't come into. You wouldn't build something that didn't have a ramp or something like that. And so I submit the same should be true for your online presence. You should adhere to a set of practices that help your website to be accessible to all people. And so there are some online guidelines for sorting through that process. We ourselves at GuideStar are in the process of doing that ourselves. And so some of the things that involves are making sure that your developers have code for the ways that information is read by text-to-speech software, or the ways that information on your screen can zoom so that people can see it really clearly, and that the contrast ratio for light to dark is in a certain set of spectrum, or that it's accessible to folks who are colorblind. Those are important things to think about just overall, because you, especially as nonprofits, I think we strive to be inclusive and accessible to all folks. And so making sure that your online presence is not any different from the rest of your mission and vision and the ways that you move through the world, I think is incredibly important and is something that you should give thought to. And it, of course, is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. But as you improve your organization's website, keep those principles in mind, and move forward with them with any improvements that you make. Should I take questions now, or should I just go ahead through this last section?
Yeah, I think go ahead through the last section, and yeah, go ahead through the last section. We'll take a couple of questions, and then there's another way that we can engage people with questions. So I'll mention that at the top of the hour as well. So no worries.
All right, so this last section is just around following up. I think that we all know that that's a good long-term practice, but especially in the age of the 24-hour news cycle and getting information quickly, following up quickly can be incredibly important too. So I always love this quote, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So it's something that I really try to take forward in my practice overall, but especially when you want to think about folks who've engaged with you and given you anything. So I really like the adage of sharing one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter, and 1 year later, and anything else in between. It doesn't have to be a big share. It can be some really small, quick things. So I really like the idea of documenting work in progress. I think that that's very successful. The point here is that you don't have to wait until something is gorgeous and finished to say, thanks, you helped us do this. You can say you're helping this to happen, and giving some, in the meantime, work in progress kinds of things. Beneficiary stories are always incredibly powerful. So what was going on for that person before and what is happening now is incredibly helpful. And in that vein, them telling that story is always going to be far more interesting than you telling that story. So using their quotes or a guest blog post or video or anything like that is always going to be really helpful. And then lastly, I'll say use a lot of different mediums and platforms. So for some folks, a video might be perfect. For others, just a set of pictures. Think about what that is for your audience and try out a ton of different things and see what sticks. So one thing that we get requested all of the time is to ask our users for this, $1 will buy XYZ, $100 will buy XYZ. This is really helpful for individual donors, especially. So a lot of our platform partners who have platforms that are for individual donations really love to see this kind of thing. So to the extent that you can do this, this is a really powerful tool. So your $5 just contributed to XYZ. I will say that remember the lessons that we just talked about around transparency and try to be really inclusive with that number. So staff time and programs and all of the pieces that really fit that, but it can really help folks to have something really tangible to hold on to, and that can be so powerful. So those are the 5 things that I wanted to leave you with, and just to give you a good understanding of the ways that keeps donors engaged. And so you might remember that we talked a little bit in the beginning around kind of the ways that donors are feeling and what might be going on for them. And so these relate directly back to those. So this lack of trust and really just opening up communication and really helping to make their good decisions happen more easily are all incredibly important. So with that, I'll open it up for general questions.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot you one question for a quick answer, but then I also want to give people the opportunity to open up the conversation on our Facebook group, which I'll share a link with that in just a moment. So one quick one, because there's a couple other things we want to get to right before the top of the hour, but that is, if you were to recommend one social media platform for nonprofits, what would that be?
So I think in general what I would say is don't choose just one. Whoever chose just Vine now has nothing. So there's something to be said for really kind of spreading out your messaging. I will say that some work better for different kinds of messaging. So if you have, say, a more political or information-heavy organization, maybe Twitter. For human services, as long as there aren't kind of privacy issues, Instagram is probably a really great way to go. And then, of course, Facebook, because it's relatively ubiquitous, and there's lots of great ways to share stories and those kinds of things, and crowdfunding.
Thank you so very much, Jasmine. I really enjoyed it, and I love the fact that you gave some very, very practical advice. I think that's great. And then the other thing about doing these webinars is that actually, there's Jasmine's contact information. Jason's going to include that in there. Is that we get to connect people in our Wild Apricot community with experts like Jasmine, which is wonderful, and we get questions throughout. But I know there are a lot of other questions that we don't unfortunately have time to get to during the course of the webinar, but there's a couple of things. One is that we are going to stick around for a few minutes if anybody has time to deal with any questions you might have about Wild Apricot. We'll talk about that in a second. But there are a lot of good questions in the queue. I would recommend, if people are on Facebook, please, you're all welcome to join our Facebook group. Jason's going to include the link in the chat for our Facebook group, and Jasmine will join us there as well. So please post your questions in there. And the wonderful thing about that is you get, other people, your peers, and anyone else who's part of the group will be able to engage in that conversation and share their experience and advice